All righty. I think we're still letting some people in, but I think we've reached our capacity. I don't know we have any more room. I would like to thank everyone and welcome them. I am Stephen Procopio. I am the president of the Public Affairs Research Council, and this is our webinar series. We have record attendance, which is wonderful. I think it's all due to our participants. I want to thank and introduce Senator Page Cortez, the president of the Louisiana Senate, House Speaker Pro Temp Representative Tanner Magee, and Chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Representative Sam Jenkins. Thank all of you for taking the time and talking to us. I also want to let everyone know that we have, we're going to start off the questions. I'm going to ask the first question and I'm going to turn it over to Melinda. And then at some point, we're going to start asking questions that y'all come up with. So please put them in the Q&A function or put them in the chat. That's where I always do. Wherever y'all put them, we will start tracking them, and then we will start asking those questions on your behalf, because that's really the whole purpose of this, is trying to get the answers that y'all want. So with that, again, thank you very much. I'm going to start off. So I know you get a lot of questions on what might be the most controversial or what are the big issues. I would like to take a slightly different tack and ask, what is the most important issue that the legislature is going to have to face this session? Senator Cortez, you want to go first?
Okay, Stephen, thank you. First of all, thank you all for having this and putting on this webinar. Certainly important to get this out there before we get started with the session. I think the most important thing we're going to deal with is obviously the infusion of dollars in the budget. You know, many people know that the ARP money that came down last year, we only appropriated 1.6 billion of the 3 billion, so there's 1.4 billion available. The economy came back better than I think most people thought, and so we will have you know, some surplus dollars. We have 700 million in surplus, of which about 455 will be able to be appropriated because of the constitutional requirement to send portions of it to the rainy day fund and the unfunded accrued liabilities. And then the excess dollars in the current year, we ended up with about $1.2 billion in excess, but we have a lot of one-time needs. The levee system down in Southeast Louisiana requires a $400 million cost share payment. We have the UI trust fund that we need to put some money into. And so we have a lot of big expenditures. We have many transportation mega projects that can use some monies. But I think just simply to answer your question, the budget.
I get that, and that's certainly nothing Par is going to argue with. But what about Representative Sam Jenkins? Are there other things? Obviously, the budget is always most important, but what else are some of the big important issues that, from your perspective, the legislation needs to tackle? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh no, I think we moved everyone to mute when we went into the sessions. That's why we did that. But yes, please, most important issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, let me express my appreciation for the invitation to be a part of this discussion today. I certainly agree with the Senate President that it's going to be budgetary issues. I think from our perspective, being a Democratic perspective, we want to make sure dollars are going to individuals, going to families who we feel have been affected by COVID and by the economy. So as we began to look at how we're going to approach the budget, the infusion of new dollars, I know there are a lot of capital projects that people are interested in, which is important, but we also want to make sure that we are trying to do things to aid families, aid workers in this state, and people of that nature. So we'll be looking at and suggesting that we talk about things like, how do we stand up a paid family and medical leave program to some extent? How can we do that? We are certainly concerned about continuing our criminal justice reforms, especially the reinvestment of the savings that should be coming from it. There should be some accountability for that. So we're going to be asking to see where that's at. And we certainly have a concern about a lot of young people, young families who are leaving the state. I think the census has showed us that we are losing some people. So we want to try to make sure that we're putting some things in place that could address those issues and concerns for those persons who feel as though opportunities are not here for them in the state of Louisiana.
Great, thank you. A great answer. And I'll point out, Par, does not typically get involved in criminal justice reform issues, though we are looking at that. That may change in the near future. So thank you very much, Speaker Pro Tem Magee.
Yeah, no, thank y'all, and thank y'all for having me as well. I'm probably going last, have to echo everything everybody else already said, but I think from my perspective, and I think from the House leadership side of it, I think our biggest concern when it comes to the budget is that we don't repeat what happened after Katrina, where you saw the administration at that time basically set up the $2 billion shortfall that we walked into when I came in. And so I think we're going to be very concerned about how one-time dollars are spent, that they're not spent on recurring expenses of any kind of way, and that we're not setting ourselves up. And over that, you have the 0.45 rolling off. That's going to overlay with all of this as well. So I mean, I think that's is going to be where a lot of, at least the members I talked to, where their heads are going to be at. And I'm glad that Sam brought up where the reinvestment of the criminal justice dollars are going to, because I'm deeply personally concerned with that, because, you know, I've already seen where Department of Corrections has used that money it's supposed to go into services to keep people from not going back to jail. But they've already used it for capital projects for Department of Corrections, which I think is not in the spirit of what justice reinvestment was. And I actually raised that issue at Appropriations Committee before. So I think that's a very interesting, and I'm glad to learn that Sam and the Democrats heads are going to be in that space. I think it's a good place to be.
Great, thank you. Thank you for all of that. I'm going to turn over to Melinda, but I'm going to let all our participants know, as you have questions, throw them in the chat, throw them in the QA, do what you need to do, or text us, whatever you want. We want to ask your questions. So with that, Melinda has a series of questions in the meantime. So I want to turn it over to her.
Yeah, well, I'm a little shocked nobody's put in a question yet, but I have some, so I'll just go with them until I see questions from other people. Since y'all started talking about the budget, I'll start with that topic, which is now that the governor's released his executive budget and the hearings have started in Appropriations and Finance, are there any obvious places where you think you will differ from what the governor is proposing? Are there specific things that that you don't like, or that you've seen some changes that are obvious to you at this point? And I guess let's go in reverse this time, and I'll start with Representative Magee.
I think that, at least from the House perspective side of it, I think there's some concerns. We support, I think it's fair to say we support the Baton Rouge Bridge, and we think it's a worthy project. Our concern is that there's no site selection yet for it, as far as there's not been a consensus of where the land is. And so we don't want to put $500 million on the sideline. We feel like that was really more messaging by the governor than an actual plan. We were happy to spend $500 million on the bridge if it's attached to an actual plan to secure the rest of the funding, and that project can be more shovel ready than it appears to be right now. So I think where our main question is going to be is not that we're against the spending, but we would like to see a more detailed plan articulated by the administration on how we're going to make that bridge a reality, and that we're not just putting the 500 on the sidelines. And then I think we are also going to disagree with the governor on how much money he's putting into the unemployment trust fund. I think we would like to put less money back into the unemployment trust fund. I think we think that that's a place that's going to reoccur, it's going to fill back up on its own. So I think there's going to be a disagreement there. From what, off the top of my head, those are two things I can think of that I'm hearing the most from members about where they're concerned about the governor's plan. Because, I mean, while it is COVID-related expense, I think the House's desire would be to let's put this money in places that we can get more return of our investment than where it's just being kind of refilling a back-end account.
Okay, and Senator Cortez, I know that you've expressed some concerns about the Baton Rouge Bridge money as well. Is that a primary area of concern for you?
Yeah, I think so. I once again, I'm coming out Tanner, and of course Sam's going to chime in, but I think we're in lockstep on that. When you haven't proceeded with your federal environmental impact study, and you haven't picked a corridor yet or a route, you haven't started to do any acquisition, it's hard to park $500 million of excess money in a fund that could sit there for 15 to 20 years before it gets spent. The cost of things are going up every day. Today, specifically, supply chain has affected the cost of infrastructure projects. So again, I agree with Tanner. Again, I don't believe that the intention was more than to say this is a very important project and we're making you aware of it by putting it in our executive proposal. The UI trust fund, again, I couldn't disagree with Tanner on that. I think that there's a lot of truth to the fact that the more it can rebound on its own, the better it is. But we never want to put businesses in the position of having a backdoor tax and triggering anything. So that'll be debated in the labor committees and in the appropriation and finance committees. But by and large, I think what Tanner said, I think we probably all agreed at the Joint Budget Committee when Commissioner Darden introduced it, that look, let's not make those mistakes. Learn from Katrina. One-time money, spend it on one-time expenses, and let's not grow government knowing that you have a 0.45 that is set to roll off, and then leave other legislators and other governors in a bind. So I think I just have to agree with Tanner. I think I may say it in a different way, but I think we're saying the exact same thing.
Okay, well, Representative Jenkins, I think you might disagree with some of this. I don't know. Are there particular areas in the governor's executive budget that that you have problems with, or you see wanting to make changes?
Well, believe it or not, we may be all on the same page, to be honest with you. There are some concerns about the amount of money being committed to the Baton Rouge Bridge, as well as the amount of money being committed to the Unemployment Trust Fund. We are hoping that there could be room, with those dollars to see if some of it could go in a different direction. So my answer is somewhat short because I don't think that there's any big disagreement that those are a couple of areas in the budget that we would like to maybe take a second look at and vet a little bit more closely.
Okay. Well, we are starting to get questions from the audience folks. So let's start with some of those. We have somebody asking if there will be support for a constitutional convention and what folks think are the pros and cons of such a convention. On that one, I'll start with Representative Jenkins.
Well, I mean, I can tell you in the past, our caucus has been reluctant to support a constitutional convention. Part of the reason is that there is some concern that if you go into that process, trying to focus on one area of the Constitution, other areas may come into play. I'm not certain at this stage if assurances have been made to us that a constitutional convention can just be restricted to maybe some of what people want to address. So we have not had a discussion about it as it relates to what may be coming up in this session, but that has been what has occurred in the past, and I foresee that those concerns may remain as far as supporting that in this particular session.
Okay, Senator Cortez.
Well, I think there will be some support for it. I think again, Representative Jenkins has made a good point. The question always is the fear factor of what is going to be opened up and what are you going to want to talk about. Now, I did bring a bill a few years back to call a constitutional convention. I'm not fearful of it. I think that the real concern is who are the delegates, where do they come from, what's the politics of the constitutional convention. We've had multiple constitutions since 1812. I think we've had 11 or 12, and we haven't had a new one in 50 years. And Lord knows we've amended it quite a few times. But remember, the amendment process requires a 2/3 vote of both houses and a vote of the people. One of the things, if we did get to that point, that I would suggest is that we raise the bar on how to amend the Constitution, and that it be a framework much like the US Constitution that says this is the basic tenets, and then go past statutes. We learned from history in the 1921 Constitution, Huey Long only a few years later created it as a statutory book because he put everything in the Constitution, and it took us, another 60 years to repeal that Constitution and start a new one. And we've amended it, frankly, I think most of us would agree, probably too many times.
Representative Magee, I know you actually have a bill on this subject, so clearly you're in support of the concept. Can you talk a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish, and also if you see enough support in the legislature for such a convention?
Look, I did follow a bill for a limited constitutional convention, and I've supported it in the past when we've tried. Whether there's enough support, I'm not sure. We got close a couple of times as far as I think we may have gotten to 70 once in the House last term. I'm not sure if we even got to 70. I'm trying to remember back if we got there, but we got close. I know that. It's hard because there's so many people, so many special interests are tied into the Constitution at the end of the day. That's what we're really talking about. And look, nobody thinks they're a special interest group, but everybody thinks everybody else's interest group is a special interest group. So at the end of, so you have firemen's retirement, police retirement, teachers retirement, all these things are tied into this Constitution, and everybody doesn't want to pull off that Band-Aid and see what it smells like. But at the end of the day, and I understand by spirit, we're 49th. I mean, what do we have to lose at this point? I mean, I can't see, I feel like we're always just nibbling at the edges of trying to transform the state. And then you hear the constant refrain that the Constitution is handing in our way. So to me, it feels like, why not do it? Mine sets up a delegate process where basically the Speaker, the Senate President, the Governor, and the judicial branch has appointment power to do the delegates. I would like to do it that way because I feel like it gives us the best chance of getting some maybe more of an academic side to the Constitution itself, that it can be a mixed and balanced. And then it is limited, basically just dealing with finances. And the reason why I did that is because I saw Neil Abramson try for a number of years, and he kept whittling down what the Constitutional Convention would be and gaining more support that way. And so I'm in an attempt to not reinvent the wheel or try and make the same mistakes that Neil did to get to the point. I just started where Neil ended up and built from there. So it's that's my idea. I don't know how far it goes. I haven't polled people, but I mean, I would like to see it happen for sure.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let whoever wants to answer this one take it, but it's a question about the federal infrastructure money that's coming in. And this question talks about strings as relates to the project, essentially that, the feds will have requirements on how the money can be spent, particularly in favor of electric and green transportation projects and ideas. Do y'all have any concerns about the federal strings attached to this money, or have y'all heard anything about federal requirements that may limit how you want to use the money? And I'll let whichever one of you wants to take that one.
Well, I don't think that the federal strings are going to be that big of a burden on the state. I think that there are some buckets that they are limiting the use of, but you still have to draw them down. A lot of people think that this was additional federal dollars, but what happened was the federal infrastructure, the Transportation Trust Fund monies that we use to draw down a lot of the federal dollars, that one's going away. So we're going to be drawing down transportation dollars for infrastructure, and it's going to have some strings attached. But by example, strings are attached currently. You can use federal dollars on interstate roads. You can't use them on state roads. So to that extent, we have strings attached today that we have to employ. So I don't see it at this point being a huge hurdle in getting what we need to get done.
Okay. One of the other questions we have involves the climate task force that the governor has set up. And essentially the question is whether the legislature is willing to help support and finance solar, wind, and geothermal energy and move away from fossil fuels. That's obviously been a subject of several bills, but probably more in the opposite direction of like supporting the oil and gas industry and not necessarily helping some of these other alternative energy projects. So I guess, Representative Magee, let's start with you on where you think the legislature is in terms of trying to help finance or support solar, wind, those kind of alternative energy sources.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's at least a willingness to begin that process. I think Representative Zarang has a bill this year trying to set up a regulatory framework for wind, I believe, or solar. I can't remember which one he has a regulatory framework, but I think it's wind. And I think there's definitely a desire. I think particularly in the Gulf, setting up some sort of wind. I mean, we're not stupid. We realize there's a future out ahead of us that's not completely oil and gas related, and we need to do it. Now, I mean, I think there's also the the counterfactor is that we currently make all our money off of oil and gas, and we need to support the industry we have. So I do think that there's going to be probably beginning steps and baby steps in that direction right now. But I do think we realize that there's a future beyond oil and gas, and we need to set up the Gulf to be something that can do both in the future, but in the short run still be oil and gas, but in the future move to solar or wind or whatever. I don't feel like we're as much on solar as we are on wind. I think we see the more growth potential for the state is in using what we have now to become kind of a wind manufacturing farm with turbines. And you also see that, we have like Representative Ogeron kind of does this work already in his like private life. So I think he's a great resource for us. And I think he is going to kind of lead us on how do you start transferring oil and gas companies to wind, because I think he knows how to do it.
Anyone else want to talk about alternative energy and the legislature's role in that?
Well, I'll just chime in and say this, that, the free market generally drives everything. And so part of the infrastructure package that you asked about dealt with charging stations. So if we're gonna get into this, electric vehicles type stuff, where are they going to, get their charging, and how many people are going to all of a sudden overnight get rid of their vehicles? So, fossil fuels are what they use to drive vehicles and to fly planes. And so until the planes go away or become electric, or the cars all become electric, I mean, the product has to be brought to market. And one of the things I hear Congressman Graves say all the time, it's really about emissions. It's about emissions. And so I know that a lot of those people on the manufacturing side have done a lot in the emissions arena. And so, we don't want to, Representative Magee said it, we don't want to stifle one of the industries that provides us with some severance tax dollars and a lot of jobs. So to that extent, yes, I'm willing to support solar and wind, but I just don't think that it's on the cusp of taking over in any way, shape, or form, because it's going to be a part and parcel to the market.
Okay. Representative Jenkins?
Yeah, I would agree with what I'm hearing here. I think there needs to be a incremental approach. I certainly commend the governor and the task force for, initiating the conversation. I do believe there should be some room here for us to begin to look at solar energy. But as everyone has said, we sort of want to be respectful of the fact that we have a pretty large oil and gas industry in our state, employs a lot of people. So if we could just take incremental approach to it, and there's still a lot, to be learned about how this process should move forward. So I think open minds is the best way to approach where we are with this right now.
Okay. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask about redistricting, with the governor vetoing the congressional map that just passed in the special session. Do y'all favor, I think so, Representative Jenkins will have a different answer, I'm confident on this one. Do y'all favor the approach of a veto override effort, or an attempt to try and redraw the map in some fashion? Because I know that there were several Republicans in the House in particular that also opposed the map that's now been vetoed. So sort of what are the next steps from your perspective, and what do you see the legislature agreeing to? And I will let whoever wants to take that one first start off.
I'll go first. It'll be easier on the Senate side. So the first part of this equation is that, the Constitution requires us to come in for a veto override session 40 days after the adjournment of the session. So we're required to come in unless a majority of either house sends in ballots suggesting that it's not necessary. So that's going to dictate the first part of the process is, do we come in for one, which would be March 23rd, which would be the 40th day. So if the House sends in 53 ballots saying it's not necessary, or the Senate sends in 20 ballots saying it's not necessary, then we would have to start over with that new bill, which I know Representative Stefanski has one pre-filed. But if that doesn't happen, then we'll have to take up the bills on an override, a veto override. Senator Hewitt, of course, we sent 2 bills to the governor's desk. Senator Hewitt has one from the Senate side, and the Speaker has one on the House side. and the House of Origin would take up their bill for the veto override. Given that we had, I believe, 27 votes in the Senate to pass those bills, and 26 is the barrier to override, I suspect that the Senate would probably move to override unless the veto message has such a compelling message to some of the members that they were to switch their vote and not vote to override. But the real question is for the other two members here, what will happen on the House side is the real question.
Representative Magee, let's start with you, and then we'll move to Representative Jenkins after that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Look, the approach of trying to redraw a map, I think, is probably not a good approach. And I'll tell you why. Is because I don't think we're going to ever I don't think that we'll ever have enough support for a map that the governor will sign at the end of the day. And that's just the reality of the chamber. Not anything anybody can do about it. You're just never going to get to enough votes on a map that I think the governor would sign. So when you
what you're saying is, just to be clear, you're saying that that you don't see any scenario where the House supports creating a second majority minority district.
No, I do not. And that's just the political cards. And people get mad when I tell them things and they impute it on me. I'm just a lot of times the weatherman telling you which way the wind blows, because I talk to all these members and they get mad at me like, I can't believe you said something. This is just the truth of this scenario. Talking to all the members and seeing where they are, I just don't ever see us getting there. Now, I will say that flipping that over, it would make it sound like override's easy. I doubt that it's easy in the House. We do have 3 Republicans who voted against the map, and then we had some Democrats who voted for the map. So you're getting this weird space of what's everybody going to do when it's time to kind of put your foot on the line and say where you stand. I suspect that the 3 Republicans will come over, but I haven't had that conversation with them. And then the question is, well, when that happens, we're still 2 votes short. I know Francis Thompson has already committed to voting with us on it. That leaves us 1 vote short. And so do we get that 1 vote is the $1 million question. I really don't know at the end of the day how that works out. I know Sam's probably going to work his hardest, and as he should, from his position, to make sure we don't get that 1 extra vote. And so that we're going to see where it lies, and we'll go from there. I think that's probably what we're looking at.
Okay. Representative Jenkins, obviously, Representative Thompson has already said that he's going to break ranks and vote for an override. Do you see any other Democrats doing that? And do you see any consequences for Representative Thompson from the party because he's willing to do the override?
Well, first of all, I certainly want to commend the governor for keeping his word and vetoing the congressional maps, because they did not meet standards, in his opinion, and the opinion of some legal experts, of meeting the requirements of the Voting Rights Act, as well as the fact that it certainly just did not add a second black seat when it was shown time and again that you could add a second black seat. And if you show that you could do it, then it's something that should have been done. Now, as it relates to the veto override, I think there's a probability that we can sustain the veto for some of the reasons that's already been expressed. I do think you have some people on the other side of the aisle who have some serious concerns about the congressional map and what's happening in the districts where they live. And I know that the veto vote is somewhat different from a vote on the bill, but that does give some hope that we may be able to sustain a veto. But having said that, I'll go back to what the Speaker Pro Tem was bringing up, and I've said this also. I don't see that body, that being the House of Representatives, drawing a map that will add a second black district. So where did that leave us? I think it leaves us where many of us would like to see this discussion go, and that's into the hands of the legal experts in the courts to make some determination as to whether or not Louisiana should have a second black congressional seat. So, I mean, that's pretty much the way we see it at this point in time.
Which is pretty much how that session started, with people assuming a lot of these questions would end up getting resolved in lawsuits. So,
correct.
Melinda,
and I think in the long run, I mean, in order to get some finality, I believe that's where we're going to need to go. Veto, no veto. As I said, I don't think that brings finality to this discussion. And, I think it's something that the courts are going to have to look at. And usually when these things are done, okay, they're done because a court has said you must do it. And so I believe that's the arena where this should be headed.
Senator Cortez?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add one little caveat to that, and that is the one group that's being left out of this conversation are the citizens of the state of Louisiana, who in 8 months have to know who they can vote for in their district for Congress. And so if we delay and we have to start with the process of another bill that may or may not make it through the process and may or may not get signed, we could be in July, which puts them 5 and 4 months away from election day. And yet not the congressman so much, candidates, as you know, in congressional districts, you don't have to live in a district to run in a district. But as a citizen, you can only vote for the candidates that, go to the polls and qualify to run in your congressional district. We do a disservice to the people of the state of Louisiana if we don't let them know soon enough so that they can figure out what are the qualifications of the candidates that are going to qualify, who are they, what do they stand for, and what can they do for them in Washington, D.C. So we can't leave the citizens of the state of Louisiana out of this equation. That's part of I think, going to be part of the conversation.
I understand. Well, let's move on to some retirement questions that we've gotten in the chat. Essentially asking is if there's an effort to grant a COLA, or if y'all think the policy for dealing with COLAs for the retirement systems is fundamentally a broken system that needs a longer term solution. I don't know which one of you feels like the retirement expert on this panel discussion.
Well, I spent 12 years on the retirement committee, so I call it sometimes purgatory. But as Stephen knows, he spent a few days in retirement committee as well. So one of the things that is sort of a misnomer is the COLA, or the cost of living adjustment. Everybody knows that the retirement system provides you with a benefit upon retirement with no guarantee of any increase whatsoever. Many years ago, when I was in the House of Representatives, we created a process by which, if the returns on the investments were greater than the required returns, it went into a fund, and at a certain point, if the fund could fund the COLAs, we would issue a COLA based on that. Senator Price and I have had, as the chairman of the Senate Retirement Committee, have had a lot of conversations. He and I both like the idea of the 13th check because it doesn't create an unfunded accrued liability. It's a one-time payment, but for the retirees, the expectation is, why do you give me it once and not give it to me next year? Well, the answer is because the investments are not giving enough return such that we would have greater unfunded accrued liabilities if we did do that. And by the way, a few years ago, we passed a constitutional amendment that requires any retirement bill that creates an unfunded accrued liability to require 2/3 vote of both houses, so that the policy would have to be dire. Otherwise, it wouldn't pass, because it would, again, put more debt on the state, which affects our bond ratings and everything else. So that would be my thought. Is I support anytime we can give our retirees. Many people in my family are retirees, and that's what they rely on. But COLAs, we do have a system for it. It requires that we get returns on investment above and beyond what's required to keep our UAL in check.
Okay. Anyone else, or should I move on to the next question?
I'd like to chime in real quick. So I hear what you're saying, Senator Cortez, and I certainly appreciate the need for the 13th check and the people's desire. But doesn't that necessarily point to maybe a deeper need for other reforms, whether in the experience account or more broadly?
Well, when you talk about the reforms, then I think you got to go back to Senator Magee's bill for the constitutional amendments. I mean, Constitutional Convention, because maybe the problem is retirement benefits are very sacred. They're effectively property rights. And so to take away someone's property rights is part of the fear of why they don't want a constitutional convention. And I get that. But it's problematic unless we just shift to a defined contribution system, i.e. a 401k type for new hires, which of course, as you know, and you've been in many of these meetings, well, that reduces the inflow of money into the system from an employer match which would allow that UAL to just skyrocket. And so we don't create we'd have to have a whole lot of billions of dollars to pay down that UAL immediately before we shift over, I believe, as a major policy shift. I mean, we've tried, we've tried probably a decade ago, we took a hard look at it. I just don't think you get enough consensus to move in that direction.
For now.
Because it's so complicated.
For now. I appreciate it. Thank you. Melinda, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. I knew Stephen was going to have some thoughts on retirement. So we've got a question about tort reform being considered a big success in a recent session, but insurance rates continue to soar. And this person wants to know if essentially if y'all misled the public in that debate, or if you have any regrets about the way tort reform was explained, and why weren't there any insurance reductions mandated in the legislation?
I'll take that one. First of all, I think we can't control how certain interest groups message issues in front of the legislature. That's just not a possibility. I will say that the author of the bill on most of the bills on tort reform never promised any sort of insurance reduction rates. That was never actually part of his speech. What we did is we tried to bring Louisiana's tort laws in line with the common tort laws around the United States. Now, I never had huge expectations because our problems in the insurance industry is way bigger than just one single issue. Even if you accept that that's a piece of the issue, I don't think it's enough. And so I think when we were dealing with all these other issues, I think they have to be addressed as well. That said, and I've been public about it, one of the things we need to do is we're one of 9 states that elected an insurance commissioner. And I'm probably the only person who will willingly say this. We need to get rid of the insurance commissioner as a political position in Louisiana. It is completely hurting us from that standpoint. I think that would be step one, because that will allow decisions to be made away from a political process. You're not receiving donations from insurance companies. You're not receiving donations from anybody. You need to be in an appointed position, run as regular department like most of the states do. I think the second piece is that why didn't we mandate a reduction? Well, what are you going to do? Mandate a reduction for 1 year, and then the insurance companies come back 2 years later and go back to where they were? I don't know that you can mandate insurance reductions and have any sort of real success with that model. Now, eventually, hopefully, if you do all the things that, if you look at the insurance journals, one of the things they recommend is getting rid of the insurance commissioner. But also, I think one of the rules that are hurting us is the insurance commissioner himself has what he calls a desk rule, which means he's created a policy, which I think is unconstitutional, that he'll only improve insurance rates twice a year. I think that's frankly not a good rule, because they're going to then err conservatively on what they're going to do with insurance rates, and they're not going to reduce them as low as they can, because they feel like if they do it, only have a second shot at the apple, that they're not going to go all the way down. What you should do is allow them to make the change and adjustments on insurance rates whenever they feel they can, and he'll look at it. He says it's a consumer protection issue. I completely disagree with it. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles we're having right now. But you're never going to change the fact, not going to never, but we still have the issue of bad infrastructure, uneducated drivers, huge uninsured motorist populations. All these things are contributing factors to our insurance rates. So eventually, we're trying to address those every day. That's why we talk about infrastructure spending. That's all chipping at the apple. I think we need to take a hard look at raising the mandatory minimum of insurance coverage from more than 15,000, because I think that's one of the biggest issues we have, is that if you get hit by somebody who's underinsured, their money is not enough to make you whole, and then your insurance company has to pay the difference. So I'm not going on the whole thing, but there's a lot of issues in that one area. And so I never believed, and I never said it to anybody, and the author never said to anybody this was going to be the perfect pill, but it did bring us in line. And I genuinely believe that the state of Louisiana should do a better job of bringing our laws in line with everybody else, because I do believe that is ultimately better for business.
Okay, Representative Jenkins, did you want to chime in, or are you? Or not?
Yes, thank you, Melinda. I believe the tort reform effort was totally misrepresented. It was tied to the idea that it would reduce insurance rates, and that premiums would go down not later, but sooner. I mean, that was said time and again. And I just think that was totally misrepresented. I believe the only thing that I see now that we got out of the effort was disrupting our court system, as well as the lives of persons who were injured in accidents. I just don't think enough focus was placed on insurance companies and their practices in the insurance companies industry to try to bring some changes at that level. This whole thing to me was much to one side. It appeared to me that the whole idea was that lawyers on billboards was the big problem, but lawyers having commercials were the big problem. But we just didn't spend enough time, in my opinion, and a lot of this came before the committee that I served on, talking about the insurance companies and how they set the rates and what things were being considered. Can some changes be done in those areas? Here we are. And even now, I can tell you as a practicing attorney out here, there's quite a bit of confusion in the court system now, about the changes that have come into place as a result of tort reform. So hopefully at some point, we can begin to go back and look at some of this. And I tell you, one of those areas that's really causing some concern, and that's when you made your changes to your collateral source rule. What is happening out here in practice is that people that we represent are still looking at, bills that are coming from a lot of these healthcare facilities. Although if a case proceeds on a certain percentage of that bill, in other words, whatever your insurance would pay or whatever Medicare or Medicaid would pay is what's going to be ordered to be paid. But yet you have a lot of private facilities who are still sending full bills through third-party collectors for clients to pay. So we're going to have to revisit some of those issues. That's just one of them that I see, and from a practical standpoint, that we did not address. If we're going to say now that it's only a certain amount can be awarded, based upon what Medicare or Medicaid or what your insurance pay, then we've got to talk to these hospitals over here now who are sending out bills through third-party collectors for the full amount of what they charge the patient. So some of this needs to be revisited at some point in time.
Okay, well, let me switch gears on you. We have a question in the chat about several bills that are proposed dealing with nursing homes in declared emergencies. This question is, there's been a lot of resistance to placing extra restrictions or regulations on the nursing homes in recent years, but in light of what happened with the scandal concerning Bob Dean's nursing homes during Hurricane Ida, do you think some new restrictions or regulations that address how and when nursing homes evacuate during a natural disaster are actually going to pass? Obviously, there are several bills on this subject for the session. Anybody want to tackle that one? Senator Cortez, I'm just going to tap you in here.
All right, Melinda, of course. Well, we've had a number of incidents out there in the state of Louisiana, whether it be in the arena of public safety or in nursing homes, that have given quite often a black eye to the whole industry, or in the case of police forces or nursing homes. You mentioned the two are the incidents within the nursing home. But one of the complaints we got, I'm pretty sure every legislative office got, was when an elderly person was in a nursing home and you couldn't access them, during an emergency. That's when they start calling us, screaming and saying, you have to get me to my mother or my father. And so to that extent, I don't know how about communication. I don't know the specific bills. I haven't seen the specific bills that are out there yet, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of conversation around it. Those are the ones that are emotional, and those are the ones that people demand to get heard in the legislature. So I'm sure they will be heard. What, if any, effect will come from them, I don't know at this point, but certainly I think they're going to be out there and be heard.
Right. And a few of the bills that I know of would require the nursing homes, for example, to have generators in times of emergencies, would require them to actually file emergency plans with the state that are publicly available for families to see, those kind of things. Representatives Jenkins or Magee, do y'all have thoughts on those?
Well, I'll just say that preparedness for emergencies, Representative Magee knows as well as anybody the lack of preparedness, and there's going to be some conversations around that. So they probably will segue into that, just preparation prior to the emergency, if we know it, like a hurricane.
Yeah, I could spend about 3 hours on a call telling you about the lack of preparedness we have for any emergency in this state, not just nursing homes. But I mean, and look, I support what
That
you're
can be our
telling me.
next webinar, Tanner.
Yeah, exactly. All the failures that we have, because I've experienced a number of them. But I would also add that, I think, and I'm fine with the generator, all that stuff makes sense. But I would say that a lot of times I think we rush in whenever there's something goes wrong, when somebody makes a mistake, we need new laws to attack the issues. But do we ever go back and check and see if the actual agencies did what they were supposed to do on the front end? I mean, are the laws sufficient in the enforcement of them? Are the people who are in charge of doing it, did they do their job to begin with? I mean, it seems like LDH should have a better role of what's actually transpiring, so the Bob Dean situation doesn't happen again. I mean, we can make all laws in the world. They're only as good as the agencies who are going to enforce them. If we pass a generator bill, what good is that going to do if LDH doesn't go and check to make sure they have a generator?
Okay, Representative Jenkins.
Well, we certainly need some improvement from what we've seen in the past. And I have not, read those specific bills, but I'm very much interested in seeing what is being proposed in those bills, because we certainly need some improvement of over the tragedies that we saw in the past. And if that is tied to a lack of planning, then we certainly do not need to move forward without having some plans and plans that the families of these residents can have some access to, and as they make the decisions about putting out loved ones into these nursing homes. So I'd like to see those bills to see exactly what they're proposing, but there's definitely room for improvement here.
Okay, well, I know we have a ton more questions that we didn't get to, and we're already running over a little bit. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to Stephen to sort of wrap us up, even though I could keep y'all on this webinar for another hour and never get through everything.
Thank you. Thank y'all so much for taking your time. I think there was a lot of great discussion. I want to point out how not everyone agreed, but how, civilly everyone treated each other. And I think that was a really good model that y'all had for everyone. I want to tell everyone, this is going to be on YouTube. So you can catch it later if you want to review it, or if you want to share it with someone else, it'll be on the FAR YouTube channel. I want to point out that next month, we're going to have a couple of topics that we were looking at, such as maybe a new voting system or workforce shortages. But we didn't get to, all of the questions at all. And I know healthcare came up a bunch, whether it was a new funding model or access or monetization or the budgeting impact. We got a little bit to the nursing homes, but there's certainly a lot more to do there, or, having nurses treatment. So that's definitely something I heard, as well as energy independence, climate change, carbon sequestration, and early childhood are all things that came up. What I want you to do for all the people listening, please send me what topics you want us to cover in the future. And we don't get it next month, we might have it the month after that. But we definitely want to tackle things that y'all find interesting and that we can follow up on. And so I saw a lot of questions in there I thought we could do, but please don't take that as necessary. That's what we're going to do. Send us any ideas that you have. With that, I want to thank everyone, our panelists, as well as our participants. I really appreciate it. And I hope this was helpful for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so
y'all.
much.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you.
All right. Thank y'all. Y'all have a great weekend, everyone.
You too.
You too.